And just for our listeners right now, to just as a reminder to them, Dr. Alexander was a professor at Harvard Medical School, if I'm not mistaken.
That is correct. I served as an associate professor of neurosurgery at Harvard, working at the Brigham and Women's Hospital, Children's Hospital, Dana-Farber in Boston. And that was from about 1988 till 2001, 2002, that era.
Mhm.
Um, Fantastic neurosurgical career. If people want, they can go to ebenalexander.com to see a list of all my publications and medical presentations and all of that. And it simply contributes to explaining the kind of mystery and power of the journey that I had uh, with this near-death experience back in November 2008.
Mhm. I wanted to ask you, I know you've told your story so many times on so many different platforms. Like, does it ever bother you to have to say it one more time, or is it something that is fun for you to share?
No, I enjoy sharing it, and what I'll do is, as you point out, yes, it is out there in many different places on the internet. If you just search, especially in YouTube and places like that. But I'm happy to share the major elements of it and what they contribute to this discussion now. Yeah, we can do
Please,
that.
please, thank you.
Okay. Well, I think important to point out that before my coma, I've spent 54 years of my life owning a very conventional scientific worldview. And that basically is a view of physicalism or materialism, the notion that only the physical world exists, things like thoughts, beliefs, attitudes are illusions, that consciousness itself is just the kind of epiphenomenal product of chemical reactions and electron fluxes in the brain. And of course, when you admit to all that kind of thinking of materialism, you have to admit that there's no place for free will to occur. If it's all just chemical reactions and electron fluxes of material following the laws of physics, chemistry, biology, then there's no place to put in free will. And that's where it begins to unravel and fall apart because I think it's crystal clear we do have free will, and especially with some of the emerging models of mind and matter in this discussion, we see ways forward that are very affirming of this notion of primacy of consciousness and of our power as sentient beings. Now, given that whole backdrop, in November of 2008, I very suddenly, over just a few hours, went deep into coma. This all happened at home. There's a myth out there from an irresponsible writer that this was a medically induced coma. Nothing could be further from the truth, and it's the reason why the scientific community takes my journey so seriously. In fact, the medical details of my case report, my medical records, it's written up in September 2018 in the Journal of Nervous and Mental Diseases in a case report by Dr. Serbi Khanna, Lauren Moore, and Bruce Grayson. And they make it very clear that that brain, my brain, was in no shape to harbor any kind of dream or hallucination, much less this extraordinary spiritual odyssey I went on when my brain was demonstrably incapable of providing such a situation. And another thing to point out, this is an atypical feature of my NDE. The NDEs are always tailored for the individual who's having them. They have no other reason for existence. Now, as scientists, we can study them in large numbers and discern patterns and start to delineate that there's an actual realm that this all involves, that it's not imagination and wishful thinking, but something much more than that.
Mhm.
Now, uh, in my journey, though, I was amnesic. And when I first came back to this world, so I was trying to explain it all, and my neuroscientific knowledge was not yet returned to me. That took about 2 months post coma. But I thought, well, I guess memory loss would be explicable if this was the extreme case of meningoencephalitis my doctor said it was, then that might have deleted memories. But then where were the memories coming back from? Because by 2 months post coma, the memories were more complete than they had been before coma. That's something we discuss in detail in our book, Living in a Mindful Universe, how memories are not even stored in the brain. And that's really one of the last nails in the coffin of scientific materialism. Anyway, way this journey proceeded for me in this very amnesic state where I had no memories of Eben Alexander's life or Earth or this universe, is it started in the earthworm's eye view, primitive, coarse, unresponsive realm, like being in dirty jello. I had no body awareness during any part of this. but certainly an awareness of kind of tactile roots or blood vessels all around me, all that kind of thing. It was a very kind of foreboding seeming environment, but luckily it didn't last forever. I was rescued by this slowly spinning white light. It came packaged as a perfect musical melody, and it opened up like a rip in that ugly earth were my view realm and led me up into this brilliant, ultra real gateway valley. The biggest mistake people can make about thinking about NDEs is that they're kind of dull and murky. This existence in the physical realm is dull and murky compared to that. That is sharp, crisp, clear, detailed, memorable, transformational, most extraordinary thing I've ever been through,
Mm.
and all happening at a time when my brain was offline for all intents and purposes, according to modern neuroscience. And so, in that Gateway Valley, many Earth like features, it was kind of like Plato's world of ideals for the individual soul. This is where life reviews would happen, you know, your life flashing before your eyes. That's a very important concept in NDEs. And for me, it was a lovely valley surrounded by forest. There were sparkling waterfalls and the crystal blue pools. There were thousands of beings dancing down in this very verdant, fertile valley. All the plant life, buds, blossoms on trees, flowers opening in this dynamic, rich, robust, alive fashion. There were no signs of any death or decay anywhere. And in this beautiful setting, I was observing it all as a speck of awareness on a butterfly wing. There were millions of other butterflies looping and spiraling in vast formations. And the best part about it was I wasn't alone. There was a spiritual guide, a beautiful young woman beside me on the butterfly wing, sparkling blue eyes, high cheekbones, high forehead, broad smile. She looked at me with a look of pure love. She never had to say a word, but her message delivered to me is kind of a telepathically emotional, deep truth. You are deeply loved and cherished forever. You have nothing to fear. You are richly cared for. I cannot tell you how reassuring that message was in that moment. Um, and it was also a reminder that this was a spiritual home. It seemed very familiar. Um, I'm sorry, my dogs are barking. I'm going to have to take a break for
Sure,
one
sure,
quick. Hold on, I'll be right back.
sure.
Julie, y'all get out. If you're going to bark, you get out.
This is the 3D world. Dr.
Oh,
Alexander,
sorry.
could I ask you,
Oh,
how does it feel to interact with animals now after your NDE?
oh, I'm much more aware of their soulful nature, and they are. I mean, I was an animal lover before, and I had dogs, many dogs, and a cat growing up. But we have two puppies, and they're fully engaged in this kind of discussion. They are
Right.
part of the package, you know. And it was Rene Descartes who led us on the wrong pathway of thinking that animals were just automatic machines, you know, automatons, and not alive and feeling and sensing like we are. But I
Mm,
think it's because Rene Descartes probably never had a dog at home, and that's too bad. But luckily, we're moving beyond all that. It's part of this revolution in understanding the primacy of consciousness is also acknowledging that animals are a very rich part of that spiritual realm. Obviously, plants are too. That's something that we all witness in these events, but it's the animals where you have to kind of pay attention to how we treat them because I think
mm,
it can come back if we treat them poorly. I mean, the biggest lesson
mm,
of near death experiences is treat others as you would like to be treated. And, you know, that's the golden rule written into the fabric of the universe. So I'm just very grateful that this lesson is now being scientifically validated by further study of these experiences to a point where we can now acknowledge that scientifically the afterlife and even reincarnation have been proven beyond any reasonable doubt. And for anyone who still needs the scientific evidence to help them with that, I would send you to bigelowinstitute.org, where you find 29 essays written 3 years ago by prominent scientists around the world who study the afterlife. And all 29 essays make a very compelling case for the reality of the afterlife in our current scientific era. So,
Doctor,
anyway,
do you think, oh, sorry, last one. Do you
oh,
think that reincarnation is optional? Like when you're over there, could you choose to just stay there or
I
continue
believe
wherever?
Well, I believe there's a lot of free will of the higher soul involved. So, yes, I would say it's absolutely optional. I can't even pretend to claim to have the kind of full knowledge of the theater in which decisions about reincarnation or not. And what are the options of moving beyond that? I mean, other universes, other dimensional realities that could allow for soul growth above and beyond what we experience kind of in human form. I
Mhm,
don't know what's out there, but I'm very open-minded about a far grander universe than anything I ever assumed to exist before.
mhm. Thank you.
So, should I get back to where I was in my story,
Oh yeah,
or
you were on the butterfly. You had
yes,
just
with the beautiful
met.
woman and the message from her, you are deeply loved and cherished forever. And I cannot tell you how comforting it was at the time. And so that was the beginning, though, of my pathway of ascendance. Because what happened next was, first of all, a soft summer breeze that blew through, and it was my first awareness of the reality of that God force, of that infinitely loving God force at the core of all that is, that we co-create emerging reality with. Um, and so that I call it the breath of God, or that soft summer breeze. It was my awakening to that in that Gateway Valley. But then I remember seeing all of it collapsing down. I could sense kind of the material realm and its lowest density, all of that collapsing down, and then this whole spiritual realm with a completely different ordering of time. It's important to point out that in that spiritual realm, you're no longer stuck in Earth time. And that's why people can see birth, death, everything in between, past lives, implications of future lives, et cetera, all of that um, simultaneously. And that's what makes these experiences ineffable, so difficult to put into our earthly language. Um, because the journeys are far grander than that in terms of what they show us, the interrelationships, all of that. And so I saw all of that collapsing down, including that deep time or meta time that allows for this kind of much richer interaction with our lives without being restricted by earth time flow at all. And then all of that collapsing down until I was in what I call the core. The core was an infinite inky blackness filled to overflowing with the divine love of that infinitely uh, loving, kind, and merciful God source that so many near death experiencers have witnessed and merged with, I would say, is the best explanation for it. More than 90% of people who have near death experiences going back thousands of years across all cultures, many of them previously atheist or agnostic, but more than 90% of experiencers come away believing, not just believing, but knowing in the reality of a loving personal force at the core of this universe, that God force. And I came back realizing it doesn't matter if you want to try and call that force God, Allah, Brahman, Vishnu, Jehovah, Yahweh, Great Spirit, all the many names people apply to it. Just step back and recognize that outside of attempts by religious ideologies to control people, there's a deep reality to these experiences pointing to the existence of that God force. And that I think is a very important point, especially now that scientific analysis is validating these kinds of experiences by the thousands. And that's where we can start to really grow from them. So, in this core realm, all dualities resolved. You know, we live in a world where you have masculine, feminine, dark, light, good, evil, etc. All these different spectra of possibilities. And yet, in the core, all of it resolves into pure oneness with the divine. In fact, in the core realm, I came to acknowledge that my very conscious awareness was directly sourced in that God force. And I think that is what is so comforting to so many near death experiences. They realize they're never separate from it. And that is what can be so comforting and what takes away their fear of death. Now, in this core realm, I was told, we'll teach you many things. You'll be going back. You're not here to stay. And it turns out that I would just spontaneously tumble back down to that earthworm eye view. But by remembering the musical notes and the melody, I was able to conjure up the light portal that led up into that brilliant ultra real Gateway Valley. Always welcomed by that loving guardian angel and the same beautiful message of reassurance. Came in slightly different forms in each passage, but it was always very affirming and reassuring and comforting to pass through that level to give me kind of a touchstone. And then on through those angelic choirs that provided the portal to the next highest level as I saw all of that collapsing down into that complex oversphere in the core for teaching purposes. And even though I couldn't have an Eben Alexander life review because of my amnesia, I could witness life reviews and reincarnation in very powerful fashion in these two visions that were presented to me. One I call the flying fish vision, which was a more primitive, but then a very powerful in a later passage through the core, what I call the Indra's net vision, which was this beautiful vision of interwoven fibers, the tapestry of our lives, of our souls, all coming in this pattern of it's almost like breathing of incarnation between lives, but it all leads towards growth and towards the evolution of all consciousness. So this is not some mindless mechanistic wheel of suffering that you're trying to get off of, as for example, in some interpretations of Buddhism, but more of a grace-filled growth and evolution of consciousness itself that we're all contributing to as sentient beings coming to a deeper understanding of our relationship with the universe at large. So at any rate, multiple passages, all this story is told in the book Proof of Heaven and in the many talks that I've given. So I'm giving you the main thumbnail sketch of what's important in the here and now for this discussion. And towards the end of it, there came a time when I could no longer conjure up the musical notes, the melody that would allow me to enter that light portal to those higher levels. So I was stuck now down in that earth for my view. And you'd think, that would be kind of a depressing and sad situation. But in fact, I knew I could trust in the universe that I would be taken care of. And that's when I saw thousands of beings going off in the distance around me, heads bowed, many holding candles up, this murmuring energy coming from them that was very comforting and welcoming to me, drawing me back to this world. Even though I didn't know what it was drawing me back to, but that's what it turned out to be. And then the final event of my near-death experience was seeing six faces. It would bubble up out of the muck. They'd say a few words that I couldn't understand because of the amnesia. Then they'd be reabsorbed back into the muck. And I can remember those faces as purely and clearly and crisply now as if the whole thing just happened yesterday morning. And yet when it originally happened, back on November 15th and 16th or so of 2008, I had no idea who those beings were because of my amnesia. But it was soon thereafter that I was to come back to this world, and it was really the last face I saw that ushered me back. It was a 10-year-old boy, and I didn't recognize him at the time. Turns out that was Sunday morning, day 7 of coma. The doctors had thought I had a 10% chance of survival early in the week, but on 3 powerful intravenous antibiotics on a ventilator all week long without signs of neurologic improvement. By day 7, they said I was down to 2% chance of survival, no chance of recovery, and therefore recommended stopping antibiotics and taking me off the ventilator and letting me go. Turns out that my youngest son, Bond, who was 10 years old at the time, they'd protected him from the worst news during that week, but that morning he was outside. He overheard the doctor's conversation, and he knew this was much worse than he'd been told, that it was time to let me go. That's when he came running down the hallway and pulled open my eyelids that were taped shut at the time. And one eye over here, one eye over there, neither pupil working. Anybody in medicine knows what a horrible picture that is. And I promise you, I did not hear him with my ears or see him with my eyes. I was far too gone from this world. But his pleading with me got through. Daddy, going to be okay? Daddy, going to be okay? I didn't understand the words, but there was a connection between our souls that to me was crystal clear. I had to some way work my way back to help him in whatever he was pleading about. And that's what ended up engineering kind of my higher soul, navigating my way back to this world. And soon thereafter is when I was waking up, fighting the ventilator. They pulled out the breathing tube. That's when I said, thank you. But important to point out, my brain was still so damaged by the ongoing meningitis, which was just starting to resolve, that that I didn't even recognize loved ones at the bedside. My mother, my sisters, my sons. I had no idea who these beings were. And yet, I remember just my younger sister Phyllis told me it was the most amazing thing. They'd spent this whole week just worried that I was going to die, and it all just getting worse and worse and worse. And then she came up about 20 minutes after that the breathing tube was taken out. And she said, I was sitting there on the bed like this little Buddha. And I was looking around at everyone around me, doctors, nurses, family, friends, saying, don't worry, all is well. And then I moved to the next one. Don't worry, all is well. And to have that kind of reassurance coming from someone that they were so certain was about to die. And my doctors had no idea how I was even coming back to this world. I mean, they assured me the dying brain plays all kinds of tricks, so you can just forget about it. But at any rate, that was when I came back to this world. And then, as I said, I was in and out of a paranoid delusional psychotic nightmare for 36 hours after the extubation. And to me, in looking back on it, those paranoid delusional psychotic nightmare memories disappeared within about 2 weeks. I'm glad I wrote it all down. But the deep coma memories, the rich spiritual kind of ultra real memories, those were absolutely crisp, sharp, vivid, and alive to this day. So it's absolutely amazing, the comparison of memory. And again, that's a big point we make in our book, Living in a Mindful Universe, which is the true proof of heaven to unite the science and spirituality.
Mhm.
If you'll excuse me one more time, I'm going to let the dogs back in
Sure,
and then we can get right back to our conversation.
sure, sure.
I think they'll be quiet.